Canberra is the capital city of Australia. With a population of 381,488, it is Australia's largest inland city and the 8th largest city overall. The city is located at the northern end of the Australian Capital Territory, 280 kilometres southwest of Sydney, and 660 kilometres northeast of Melbourne. A resident of Canberra is known as a Canberran. The site of Canberra was selected for the location of the nation's capital in 1908 as a compromise between rival Sydney and Melbourne, Australia's two largest cities. It is unusual among Australian cities being an entirely planned city outside of any state, similar to Washington, D.C., in the United States of Brasilia in Brazil. Following an international contest for the city's design, a blueprint by the Chicago architects Walter Burley Griffin and Marion Mahoney Griffin was selected and construction commenced in 1913. The Griffins' plan featured geometric motifs such as circles, hexagons and triangles, and was centered on axes aligned with significant topographical landmarks in the Australian Capital Territory. The city's design was influenced by the Garden City movement and incorporates significant areas of natural vegetation that have earned Canberra the title of the Bush capital. The growth and development of Canberra were hindered by the World Wars and the Great Depression, which exacerbated a series of planning disputes and the ineffectiveness of a procession of bodies that were created in turn to oversee the development of the city. The national capital emerged as a thriving city after World War II, as Prime Minister Sir Robert Menzies championed its development, and the National Capital Development Commission was formed with executive powers. Although the Australian Capital Territory is now self-governing, the Commonwealth Government retains some influence through the National Capital Authority. As the seat of the Government of Australia, Canberra is the site of Parliament House, the official residence of the monarch's representative, the Governor-General, the High Court, and numerous government departments and agencies. It is also the location of many social and cultural institutions of national significance, such as the Australian War Memorial, Australian National University, Royal Australian Mint, Australian Institute of Sport, National Gallery, National Museum and the National Library. The Australian Army's Officer Corps is trained at the Royal Military College, Duntroon, and the Australian Defence Force Academy is also located in the capital. The Act is independent of any state to prevent any one state from gaining an advantage by hosting the seat of Commonwealth power. The Act has voting representation in the Commonwealth Parliament, and has its own independent legislative assembly and government, similar to the states. As the city has a high proportion of public servants, the Commonwealth Government contributes the largest percentage of gross state product and is the largest single employer in Canberra, although no longer the majority employer. Compared to the national averages, the unemployment rate is lower and the average income higher. Tertiary education levels are higher, while the population is younger. Property prices are relatively high, in part due to comparatively restrictive development regulations. Etymology: the word Canberra is popularly claimed to derive from the word Canberra or Canberra, which is claimed to mean meeting place in the Old Ngunnawal language, one of several indigenous languages spoken in the district by Aboriginal people before European settlers arrived. Although there is no hard evidence to support this, an alternative definition has been claimed by numerous local commentators over the years, including Ngunnawal elder Don Bell, whereby Canberra or Nunbra means woman's breasts, and is the indigenous name for the two mountains, Black Mountain and Mount Ainslie, which lie almost opposite each other. In the 1860s, the name was reported by Queen Bee Yan newspaper owner John Gale scale to be an interpretation of the name Canberra or Canberra, meaning hollow between a woman's breasts, and referring to the Sullivan's Creek floodplain between Mount Ainslie and Black Mountain. An 1830s map of the region by Major Mitchell indeed does mark the Sullivan's Creek floodplain between these two mountains as Canberra. Canberra or Canberra could readily have been anglicised to the name Canberra, as the locality soon became known to European settlers. R. H. Cambage in his 1919 book Notes on the Native Flora of New South Wales, Part 10, the Federal Capital Territory, noted that Joshua John Moore, the first settler in the region, named the area Canberra in 1823, stating that there seems no doubt that the original was a native name, but its meaning is unknown. Survey plans of the district, dated 1837, refer to the area as the Canberra Plain. In 1920, some of the older residents of the district claimed that the name was derived from the Australian cranberry, which grew abundantly in the area, noting that the local name for the plant was Canberra, although popularly pronounced Canberra or Canberra. The original pronunciation at its official naming in 1913 was Canberra. History. Before European settlement, the area in which Canberra would eventually be constructed was seasonally inhabited by indigenous Australians. Anthropologist Norman Tyndale suggested the principal group occupying the region were the Ngunnawal people, while the Ngarigo lived immediately to the south of the Act, the Wundandian to the east, the Walgalu also to the south, Dandangara people to the north, and Wiradjuri to the northwest. Archaeological evidence of settlement in the region includes inhabited rock shelters, rock paintings and engravings, burial places, camps and quarry sites, and stone tools and arrangements. Artifacts suggest early human activity occurred at some point in the area 21,000 years previously. European exploration and settlement started in the Canberra area as early as the 1820s. There were 4 expeditions between 1820 and 1824. White settlement of the area probably dates from 1823, when a homestead station was built on what is now the Acton Peninsula by stockmen employed by Joshua John Moore. He formally applied to purchase the site on the 16th of December 1826, naming the property Canberra. On the 30th of April 1827, Moore was told by letter that he could retain possession of 1,000 acres at Canberra. The European population in the Canberra area continued to grow slowly throughout the 19th century. Among them was the Campbell family of Duntroon. Their imposing stone house is now the officers' mess of the Royal Military College, Duntroon. The Campbells sponsored settlement by other farmer families to work the land, such as the South Wales-With Tangara. Other notable early settlers included the interrelated Murray and Gibbs families, who owned the Yarralumla estate, now the site of the official residence of the Governor-General of Australia, for the 1830s through to 1881. The oldest surviving public building in the inner city is the Anglican Church of St. John the Baptist, in the suburb of Reid, which was consecrated in 1845. St. John's Churchyard contains the earliest graves in the district. As the European presence increased, the indigenous population dwindled, mainly from disease such as smallpox and measles. Decisions to start and locate a capital. The district's change from a rural area in New South Wales to the national capital started during debates over federation in the late 19th century. Following a long dispute over whether Sydney or Melbourne should be the national capital, a compromise was reached. The new capital would be built in New South Wales, so long as it was at least 100 miles from Sydney. with Melbourne to be the temporary seat of government while a new capital was built. Newspaper proprietor John Gale circulated a pamphlet titled Dalgetia Canberra, which, advocating Canberra to every member of the Commonwealth's 7 state and federal parliaments. By many accounts, it was decisive in the selection of Canberra as the site in 1908, as was a result of survey work done by the government surveyor Charles Scrivener. The NSW government ceded the Federal Capital Territory to the federal government, in an international design competition conducted by the Department of Home Affairs. On the 24th of May 1911, the design by Walter Burley Griffin and Marion Mahoney Griffin was chosen for the city, and in 1913 Griffin was appointed Federal Capital Director of Design and construction began. History of Canberra as a capital city. At midday on the 12th of March 1913, the city was officially given its name by Lady Denman, the wife of Governor-General Lord Denman, at a ceremony at Kurrajong Hill, which has since become Capitol Hill and the site of the present Parliament House. Canberra Day is a public holiday observed in the Act on the second Monday in March to celebrate the founding of Canberra. After the ceremony, bureaucratic disputes hindered Griffin's work. A royal commission in 1916 ruled his authority had been usurped by certain officials. Griffin's relationship with the Australian authorities was strained, and a lack of funding meant that by the time he was fired in 1920, little work had been done. By this time, Griffin had revised his plan, overseen the earthworks of major avenues, and established the Glenlock Cork plantation. The Commonwealth Parliament moved to Canberra on the 9th of May 1927, with the opening of the Provisional Parliament House. The Prime Minister, Stanley Bruce, had officially taken up residence in the lodge a few days earlier. Planned development of the city slowed significantly during the Depression of the 1930s and during World War II. Some projects planned for that time, including Roman Catholic and Anglican cathedrals, were never completed. From 1920 to 1957, 3 bodies, successively the Federal Capital Advisory Committee, the Federal Capital Commission, and the National Capital Planning and Development Committee, continued to plan the further expansion of Canberra in the absence of Griffin. However, they were only advisory, and development decisions were made without consulting them, increasing inefficiency. The largest event in Canberra up to World War II was the 24th meeting of ANZAAS in January 1939. The Canberra Times described it as the signal event. In the history of this, the world's youngest capital city, the city's accommodation was not nearly sufficient to house the 1,250 delegates, and a tent city had to be set up on the banks of the Molonglo River. One of the prominent speakers was H. G. Wells, who was a guest of the Governor-General Lord Gowrie for a week. This event coincided with a heatwave across southeastern Australia, during which the temperature in Canberra reached 108.5 degrees on the 11th of January. On Friday the 13th of January, the Black Friday bushfires caused 71 deaths in Victoria, and Wells accompanied the Governor-General on his tour of areas threatened by fires. Immediately after the end of the war, Canberra was criticised for resembling a village, and its disorganised collection of buildings was deemed ugly. Canberra was often derisively described as several suburbs in search of a city. Prime Minister Sir Robert Menzies regarded the state of the national capital as an embarrassment. Over time his attitude changed from one of contempt to that of championing its development. He fired 2 ministers charged with the development of the city for poor performance. Menzies remained in office for over a decade, and in that time the development of the capital sped up rapidly. The population grew by more than 50% in every 5-year period from 1955 to 1975. Several government departments, together with public servants, were moved to Canberra from Melbourne following the war. Government housing projects were undertaken to accommodate the city's growing population. The National Capital Development Commission, formed in 1957 with executive powers, ended 4 decades of disputes over the shape and design of Lake Burley Griffin. The centerpiece of Griffin's design and construction was completed in 1964 after 4 years of work. The completion of the lake finally laid the platform for the development of Griffin's parliamentary triangle. Since the initial construction of the lake, various buildings of national importance have been constructed on its shores. The newly built Australian National University was expanded, and sculptures and monuments were built. A new National Library was constructed within the parliamentary triangle, followed by the High Court and the National Gallery. Suburbs in Canberra Central were further developed in the 1950s, and urban development in the districts of Woden Valley and Belconnen commenced in the mid and late 1960s respectively. Many of the new suburbs were named after Australian politicians, such as Barton, Deakin, Reid, Braddon, Curtin, Chifley and Parkes. On the 9th of May 1988, a larger and permanent Parliament House was opened on Capitol Hill as part of Australia's bicentenary celebrations, and the Commonwealth Parliament moved there from the Provisional Parliament House, now known as Old Parliament House. In December 1988, the Act was granted full self-government through an Act of the Commonwealth Parliament. Following the first election on the 4th of March 1989, a 17-member Legislative Assembly sat at temporary offices at 1 Constitution Avenue, Civic. On the 11th of May 1989, permanent premises were opened on London Circuit in 1994. The Australian Labor Party formed the Act's first government, led by the Chief Minister Rosemary Follett, who made history as Australia's first female head of government. Parts of Canberra were engulfed by bushfires on the 18th of January 2003 that killed 4 people, injured 435, and destroyed more than 500 homes and the major research telescopes of Australian National University's Mount Stromlo Observatory. Throughout 2013, several events celebrated the 100th anniversary of the naming of Canberra. On the 11th of March 2014, the last day of the centennial year, the Canberra Centenary Column was unveiled in City Hill. Geography. Canberra covers an area of 814.2 square kilometres and is located near the Brindabella Ranges, approximately 150 kilometres inland from Australia's east coast. It has an elevation of approximately 580 metres AHD. The highest point is Mount Majura at 888 metres. Other large hills include Mount Taylor 855 metres, Mount Ainslie 843 metres, Mount Magoomaga 812 metres and Black Mountain 812 metres. The native forest in the Canberra region was almost wholly eucalypt species and provided a resource for fuel and domestic purposes. By the early 1960s, logging had depleted the eucalypt, and concern about water quality led to the forests being closed. Interest in forestry began in 1915 with trials of a number of species including Pinus radiata on the slopes of Mount Stromlo. Since then, plantations have been expanded, with the benefit of reducing erosion in the Cotter catchment, and the forests are also popular recreation areas. The urban environs of the city of Canberra straddle the Ginninderra Plain, Molonglo Plain, the Limestone Plain, Plain and the Tuggeranong Plain. The Molonglo River, which flows across the Molonglo Plain, has been dammed to form the national capital's iconic feature Lake Burley-Griffin. The Molonglo then flows into the Murrumbidgee northwest of Canberra, which in turn flows northwest toward the New South Wales town of Yass. The Queanbeyan River joins the Molonglo River at Oaks Estate just within the act. A number of creeks, including Jerrabomba and Yarralumla creeks, flow into the Molonglo and Murrumbidgee. Two of these creeks, the Ginninderra and Tuggeranong, have similarly been dammed to form lakes Ginninderra and Tuggeranong. Until recently, the Molonglo River had a history of sometimes calamitous floods. The area was a floodplain prior to the filling of Lake Burley-Griffin. Climate: Canberra has a relatively dry continental climate by Australian standards. Under Köppen-Geiger classification, it has an oceanic climate. In January, the warmest month, the average high is approximately 28 degrees Celsius. However, in July, the coldest month, the average high is only about 11 degrees Celsius. Frost is common in the winter months. Snow is rare in the CBD, but the surrounding areas get annual snowfall through winter, and often the snow-capped mountains can be seen from the CBD. The last significant snowfall in the city centre was in 1968. The highest recorded maximum temperature is variously reported as 42.2 degrees Celsius on the 1st of February 1968, or as 42.8 degrees Celsius at Acton on the 11th of January 1939. The lowest recorded minimum temperature was -10.0 degrees Celsius on the 11th of July 1971. Light snow falls only once or twice per year, and it is usually not widespread and quickly dissipates. Canberra is protected from the west by the Brindabellas, which create a slight rain shadow in Canberra's valleys. Canberra gets 100.4 clear days annually. Annual rainfall is the third lowest of the capital cities, but is spread fairly evenly over the seasons, with late spring bringing the highest rainfall. Thunderstorms occur mostly between October and April owing to the effect of summer and the mountains. The area is not very windy and the breeze is at its strongest from August to November. Canberra is less humid than the nearby coastal areas. Urban structure: Canberra is a planned city, and the inner city area was originally designed by Walter Burley Griffin, a major 20th-century American architect. Within the central area of the city near Lake Burley-Griffin, major roads follow a wheel and spoke pattern rather than a grid. Griffin's proposal had an abundance of geometric patterns, including concentric, hexagonal, and octagonal streets emanating from several radii. However, the outer areas of the city, built later, are not laid out geometrically. Lake Burley-Griffin was deliberately designed so that the orientation of the components was related to various topographical landmarks in Canberra. The lakes stretch from east to west and divided the city in two. A land axis perpendicular to the central basin stretches from Capitol Hill, the eventual location of the new Parliament House, on a mound on the southern side, north-northeast across the central basin to the northern bank so long Anzac Parade to the Australian War Memorial. This was designed so that looking from Capitol Hill, the War Memorial stood directly at the foot of Mount Ainslie. At the southwestern end of the land axis was Bonberry Peak, the highest mountain in the Act, approximately 52 kilometers southwest of Canberra. The straight edge of the circular segment that formed the central basin of Lake Burley-Griffin was perpendicular to the land axis and designated the water axis, and it extended northwest towards Black Mountain. A line parallel to the water axis on the northern side of the city was designated the municipal axis. The municipal axis became the location of Constitution Avenue. which links City Hill in Civic Centre and both Market Centre and the Defence Precinct on Russell Hill. Commonwealth Avenue and Kings Avenue were to run from the southern side from Capitol Hill to City Hill and Market Centre on the north respectively, and they formed the western and eastern edges of the Central Basin. The area enclosed by the three avenues was known as the Parliamentary Triangle, and formed the centrepiece of Griffin's work. The Griffins assigned spiritual values to Mount Ainslie, Black Mountain, and Red Hill, and originally planned to cover each of these in flowers. That way each hill would be covered with a single, primary color which represented its spiritual value. This part of the plan never came to fruition, as World War I slowed construction and planning disputes led to Walter's dismissal by Prime Minister Billy Hughes after the war ended. The urban areas of Canberra are organised into a hierarchy of districts, town centres, group centres, local suburbs as well as other industrial areas and villages. There are 7 residential districts, each of which is divided into smaller suburbs, and most of which have a town centre which is the focus of commercial and social activities. The districts were settled in the following chronological order. Canberra Central, mostly settled in the 1920s and 1930s, with expansion up to the 1960s, 25 suburbs. Woden Valley, first settled in 1964, 12 suburbs. Belconnen, first settled in 1966, 25 suburbs. Western Creek, settled in 1969, 8 suburbs. Tuggeranong, settled in 1974, 18 suburbs. Gungahlin, settled in the early 1990s, 18 suburbs. Molonglo Valley, development began in 2010, 13 suburbs planned. The Canberra Central District is substantially based on Walter Burley Griffin's designs. In 1967, the then National Capital Development Commission adopted the Y Plan, which laid out future urban development in Canberra around a series of central shopping and commercial area known as the town centres linked by freeways, the layout of which roughly resembled the shape of the letter Y, with Tuggeranong at the base of the Y and Belconnen and Gungahlin located at the ends of the arms of the Y. Development in Canberra has been closely regulated by government, both through planning processes and the use of Crown lease terms that have tightly limited the use of parcels of land. Land in the Act is held on 99-year Crown leases from the national government, although most leases are now administered by the territory government. There have been persistent calls for constraints on development to be liberalised. Many of Canberra's suburbs are named after former prime ministers, famous Australians, early settlers, or use Aboriginal words for their title. Street names typically follow a particular theme. For example, the streets of Duffy are named after Australian dams and reservoirs. The streets of Dunlop are named after Australian inventions, inventors and artists, and the streets of Page are named after biologists and naturalists. Most diplomatic missions are located in the suburbs of Yarralumla, Deakin and O'Malley. There are 3 light industrial areas, the suburbs of Fyshwick, Mitchell and Hume.